Okay, guys, welcome to the Winner Circle on the It's More Than Just Money Movement channel. I always say to you that you need to grab a pen and paper whenever you see us on the screens because the people that I interview are usually people that are going to drop nuggets and wisdom and knowledge that you're going to use on your journey. And today I've got Bruno Simao. He's the founder of Bruno Simao Attorneys, along with other businesses that he runs. We're going to get into a lot of his story and get to understand what he does, as well as understand certain things that are keeping people behind because a lot of people don't understand how the law works. Mr. Simao?
Sure, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, as usual. Hey, you've got a strong, firm handshake, and it means you've been hitting the gym.
Well, I'm not looking like you.
So how you been?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know how busy you are. You know, sometimes we set up meetings, it takes weeks for us to even meet. And, you know, I might have a bit of a background in terms of your journey, but I know a lot of people don't actually have a proper understanding of where your journey to becoming an attorney starts. So can you share a bit about your journey to becoming an attorney and eventually establishing your own law firm?
Sure. Look, I suppose it's not something that I speak about very often. So if I get up on stage, people want me to speak content. So normally it's straight to content. Just give me some credibility. You're an attorney. Yes, you've got qualifications. You've done it for how many years? Okay, now we're going to listen to you. So no one ever tries to ask anything more than that. Sure, yeah. So the motivation to become an attorney. It's obviously I'm not going to bore you with a massively long story, but pretty much as a kid, always geared to problem solving. So always with my parents, like with my brother, he got into PCs at a later stage, and I always sat there and always tried to figure things out. I learned from him, and I started piecing things together. And there's always a problem, and there's always a solution. And I think it's that solution-driven mindset always brought me into fields or activities that require that level of problem solving. So I grew up in Sunnyside. This was unfortunately when Sunnyside was already having its challenges.
I'm thinking Sunnyside.
Yeah. So my dad had a cafe in Pretoria CBD. So from a young age, every day after school, used to go sit at the cafe.
If your dad has a cafe, you're either Portuguese or Greek.
So Portuguese.
You're Portuguese. Okay, got it.
And I used to sit with him like after school and help him. So that like work ethic got drilled into me because, I mean, he used to wake up at 5 a.m, come home at 7, 8 in the evening, and that was like a daily thing, right? So I didn't grow up rich, and we had to work a lot for what we had. So that's now the second thing. So it was problem solving, but then the second thing was to make something, like to get into a position where I might be able to get that time and I don't need to work from 5 to 8 o'clock every day, including Sundays, only Christmas. He didn't work. He used to take off on New Year's Day. So that's like 363 days a year. No?
Jeez.
Yeah, so it was hectic, but I mean, I admire him for it. And I mean, in fact, I look up to him for all the effort that he put in because it was that actually has helped, like got me through school and that, that sort of thing. And then obviously, like growing up, I don't normally speak about this or admit it, but you get bullied at a certain point and you come up with a plan. And you start learning how to manage your surroundings. You start learning how to manage the people around you. And I mean, like playing around with computers and stuff like that wasn't going to manage the people around me. So it then became a problem-solving ability with managing people, putting it together. The only career I could think of was law.
I see. So, I mean, I don't know if this question fits specifically to what I'm about to ask you, but I know you focus a lot on litigation and property deals, company structures. Is that something you grew up knowing you were going to focus on? Or was there a moment in your life where you decided, okay, I'm taking this direction in terms of my career?
Sure. So that's a difficult one. I think, especially growing up, so maybe taking a step back. So it was only around maybe the 17, 18-year-old mark where I thought becoming an attorney is a good idea because it fits my personality. What an attorney is is very difficult to figure out when you're at that age.
Yes.
There isn't proper exposure in the schools as to what careers actually entail. So the greatest exposure that you get is what a lawyer looks like on TV. Right, and what they do on
Suits.
TV. Well, there was no Suits back
You are
then.
in a suit, eh?
Yeah, now I'm in a suit. So once I became a lawyer and Suits came out, then it got exciting.
Sure.
But I think at that age, you understand from what you watch on TV. And it wasn't that glamorous, to be honest. Like the TV lawyers back in the day were like the Law and Order guys.
Judge Judy and them.
Yeah, I think that was even afterwards. That was already when I was studying. So like your Law and Orders was all about criminal law and going to court. So yes, there was the litigation aspect. I think there was actually that assumption that that's what lawyers do. They go to court. It's only when you start actually getting into the profession that you realize there's many different types of lawyers that specialize in many different things. Going to court actually just being one of the small little components of practicing law.
Mm-hmm. And then when you I don't know, or did you do articles? You did articles, obviously.
Absolutely.
And then at what point did you start your law firm? Had you worked how long had you worked?
Yeah, so 2007, I started my articles. I was still studying. So I studied through UNISA. So like I mentioned earlier, didn't grow up with a lot of money. So UNISA was a good option because it's a lot cheaper than the residential universities. Just takes a lot of discipline to study. So I worked and studied at the same time.
You were working for a law firm at the time?
No. I ran a backpackers. So I started working.
You ran a backpackers? Yeah. What?
Yeah, so I... interesting story. So where we lived next door was a backpackers. And the one day this polystyrene head came flying over the wall. And we were like, what's this about? And you hear these guys from next door with a cricket bat and this like polystyrene human body that's now missing a head because it's in my yard. So I went over. They asked me to come over. I went over and like just sat there. They had a bar there, so we sat. We had a few drinks. We laughed. Got a job there. You almost immediately tending to guests and tending to the bar in the evening. Just to make a bit of extra money. 6 months later, they gave me a management role, so I started running the backpackers. So that was pretty cool.
So that's property in and of itself.
The hospitality industry. Because one of my
to property.
Yeah, and one of my businesses now is actually in the hospitality space. So the irony doesn't escape me.
Yeah.
Although it's not a backpackers, granted, it's a bit more higher end, but it's still accommodations.
What is it? Airbnb or is it a full-on hotel?
Yeah, so it's a mix. So we obviously took our Airbnb knowledge. Mm-hmm. And we bought a property. It's in East Rand, right? So it's got 8 rooms. It's got 3 conference facilities. The one we turned into a commercial space. Then there's another office space at the top. So we rent those out commercially. The 8 rooms and then the conference at the bottom. And then we turned the 8 rooms into Airbnb in an attempt to take away, having to have a reception and somebody like ringing and obviously the Google ads and things like that. So we market through Airbnb. We give people self-check-in and they come in, they find their room and yeah.
Nice. So in terms of handling property-related cases,
sure.
Do you think that's one of the things that have set you apart? The fact that you've also gotten into the property industry or you've done some work in property. I mean, your first job was actually managing property and managing people.
Sure.
So did that come in handy when it comes to you now running your law firm and dealing with property-related cases?
So interestingly, I got into property through, call it the back end, right? So most property attorneys, and when I say property attorney, like what do you think of?
Property practitioner, conveyancer.
Conveyancer. It's always conveyancer, right?
Yeah.
And conveyancer, so you need to remember, so conveyancers are trained to understand the laws and regulations in order to be able to transfer property from A to B.
Correct.
And then they take knowledge that they've acquired in the space and apply it to this, right? So for example, one of the people I look up to that trained me, she started in litigation, became a conveyancer. So the way she does conveyancing is very different to a lot of other conveyancers because she's, again, got that problem solving. She knows when to attack. She knows how to fight. She knows how to resist attacks, that sort of thing, how to defend. Mm-hmm. So very similar to me, I got into property because all my clients were litigious. Now, having run a business, understanding the client's business models, understanding that litigation isn't always a once-off thing. And that's the thing about my relationship with clients is it's not come to me when there's a problem, I'll sort it out and I'll never see you again. The idea is to take the property investor as an example and integrate myself into his business. What are you doing? Are you buying properties on auction? This is how evictions look like. Factor that into your costs. Don't be scared to do something just because now you need to go to a lawyer. I'm here. What do you need to do? Let's factor into your cost so you know how much it's going to cost, but maybe you're going to get a really good deal. So that, yes, the backpack is obviously influenced because I got that business know-how, that approach to this. I started in litigation. A lot of my clients were in the property space. So that's commercial. It's about money. It's about contracts. It's about property. And so the litigation was only about that. So I barely touched criminal law. I didn't do any family law. I enjoyed that business litigation and just happened to be property investors the majority of the time.
So have you got like a notable property litigation case that you've had and how you've handled it and what the outcome was?
Absolutely. So property litigation, I've got this one matter. And I'll never forget this matter. It's always the one where somebody asks me, what's the most notable matter? And I immediately go through this because it was such an interesting story, but a crazy cool story. So the client, he was property investor, speculator, bought thousands of properties. So he knew
thousands.
It was massive, like absolutely massive. But what was interesting about him is he always approached with the same angle that I just told you now, like integrate the lawyer into your business. So he knew, he showed up at that sheriff's auction and there was a guy there already fighting and throwing his arms up. And the guy he knew what he was doing. And immediately the client saw this guy's going to be a problem. And everyone that auction floor knew this guy was going to be a problem. And most people then didn't want to bid, knowing that there's going to be things that happen afterwards. My client bought that property, I think it was for about 1.2 million, because this guy was making so much noise. It was actually his fault the property undersold because no one wanted to bid on this property. But in any case, 1.2 million, but client knew that he's going to sit with problems. So it took about like 5 years. So this was an eviction case. But this eviction case, I think there was somewhere around 24 applications that had to be instituted. So it was our applications, his previous applications. So somewhere down this 5-year period, there were around 24 applications that were instituted. We were in court at least once a month on one of these applications. I had a little template that had it numbered and summarized because it started becoming so difficult to repeat it. I just used to attach a document to the papers. 5 years, client sold it, 6 million rand after we were done with the job.
They sold it for 6 million, haven't bought it for 1.2.
Yeah.
But it's simply because it was undersold because nobody was bidding for it.
And the client was smart. He provisioned, he budgeted, he knew what the outcome was going to be, but he understood it was going to be a long fight.
In terms of the legal side of things, probably maybe he spent what? Maybe 500K on legal matter, on the legal matter.
Which he budgeted for.
He budgeted for, but he sold for 6 million. So it's more like he made like 4 million.
Yeah.
Smart client. Yeah. So tell me something. When it comes to staying updated with new laws and regulations, especially those that are property related, for you, how do you get updated? How do you stay abreast so that you can understand exactly what's happening in the property industry?
So not a moment goes.
Because 5 years.
Yeah.
A lot changes. Every year there's a new regulation.
Yeah.
There's a new law. There's something new every time.
So I think not necessarily, I'm not saying this is good advice for everyone, but not a moment goes by in my day where I'm not trying to do something that will advance me knowledge-wise. So every time I approach a case, it's never a matter of, it's the same case I did last week. I'm just going to rinse and repeat. Even with the contracts that I draft, it's never rinse and repeat because you always miss something new that came, a new court case. So every time I do something, I almost refresh myself to go, but is it still relevant? Am I still doing it properly? When I jog, I've got headphones on and I've got every single thing that I listen to and ready to listen to. So it's 1 hour jog, I've got it, and I'm running to whatever tax webinar, because obviously in the property space, tax is a big one. So I've got tax webinars. Every time I'm in the car and I'm driving somewhere, I've got something playing in the background. It's the only way to stay relevant is, number one, to enjoy it, because it's something that you actually look forward to doing. And obviously, number two is to actually do it. Never be too busy to keep reading and keep learning and keep testing yourself and stress testing and keep debating with people, everyone. You know how much you learn from any, not even just lawyers, like just getting into conversations with property investors, because you've experienced something. I can promise you right now, if we sit for an hour, we have a drink together, you're going to tell me something where I'm going to ask you, oh, but how did that work? And you're going to give me your insight. And the best thing for me to do is to run home afterwards and to quickly research it. So I've learned what you just told me, how it worked, and if it's something that I can apply and practice. Everyone can teach you.
Interesting. So in terms of having clients that are navigating complex property-related issues, what's the key advice that you always give those kind of clients? Sure. I mean, I know every case will be different, but there'll always be that common thing that you can give someone who's navigating complex issues.
Yeah. So I think, two things. Number one, take the emotion out of it.
That's a big one.
Emotion, I'm not saying emotion's bad, but as an attorney, it's my job to steer clear.
Do you guys even have emotions?
Sometimes I switch off when I get home. I think the conversation around emotive reactionary behavior is problematic. That's why auctions is the perfect example of reactive behavior or emotive behavior when it comes to buying, right? People go to the auction. Have you seen auctioneers? Like some auctioneers, like without mentioning names, you go to some auctions,
play on the emotions,
and they sit next to you, and it's almost like, like football coaches when you watch American TV and football, and they sit and they motivate you, and they're in your ear and they are telling you to buy, and you can win this bid. It becomes very emotive, and it's very important to take a step back. Everything that you do has to be pen, paper, and calculation, which then brings me to the first thing, which is the planning stage. Because emotion is very easy to get to if you haven't planned, so your scope or range of decision-making is far broader. If you've put pen to paper and you've done a calculation, you know that your range is only this big. So no matter if somebody's screaming in your ear on how great this deal is, or somebody's giving you bad advice that you must go lock the tenants out, or you've done the calculation, you understand these are the risks and this is the area I'm willing to work on. Anything outside of this area is discomfort, and no one's going to push me to do it. Because the worst cases that I get are cases on principle, because they never go through. They never go through. 6 months down the line, principle disappears and cost starts becoming a factor. And that's normally when I tell clients, your case is purely based on principle. For example, some landlords trying to collect from tenants. I always sit the landlord down, like, think about it. I know right now you're gutted. You're gutted that he didn't pay rent. But how much money do you think you're going to throw at this? It's someone that couldn't afford to pay you rent. How much money do you think you're going to throw at it? And do you really think you're going to get any of it back? Like, take a week, sleep on it before you proceed.
Go the litigation route.
Because there's no point. I like my clients. I want my clients to come back to me the next time round. I don't want them to pay me and then at the end I go, well, sorry, got zero.
That's interesting because it speaks to the next question. I wanted to ask, when navigating through the contracts, right? So say, for instance, your client wants to sign a property-related deal. What are the things that they need to look at in terms of reviewing those contracts? And it could be property or buying a business for that matter. I mean, what do you think are the key things that they need to look at and
Sure.
the process they need to go through in terms of reviewing those contracts.
Sure.
Because sometimes you're not there, and maybe the deal might pass them, and they want to make sure that they clinch on the deal.
Exactly.
But the attorney maybe is busy, he's on holiday.
Yeah.
What do they do?
Yeah,
What are the things?
we're never on holiday, don't worry. I can't remember the last time I had a holiday. So I think the best advice, especially when it comes to commercial matters and contracts, when buying property and when buying a business, those are obviously two different contracts in the sense that buying a property is like buying an asset, right? So any asset that you're buying, you need to deal with it a certain way. But if you're buying shares in a business, for example, you look at different things. So fundamentally, there's differences. If I had to try find the commonalities between these type of commercial arrangements, first of all, if you're rushing into it, it's already a bad sign. Pen to paper, you haven't spoken to the lawyer, so your planning and your range is already very broad, right? So the best thing you can do in these contracts is always to have that exit. And this applies to property with suspensive conditions. It applies to business deals with...
Can you tell them what suspensive conditions mean?
Sure.
You can continue and then explain
Yeah.
what suspensive conditions would be in property and what an example of suspensive conditions would be when buying a business.
Sure. So a suspensive condition in our law is it's basically the subject to. The contract is entered into, but the effect of the contract or the enforceability of the contract is suspended until the occurrence of an event. So it's basically like a trigger. So you've entered into the contract, and there's certain obligations you need to get through to be able to fulfill the suspensive conditions. So as a typical example, I buy a property. And you're supposed to give me this property. I'm supposed to give you R1 million for the property. That's the contract. But that's suspended. You're not going to give me the property. I'm not going to give you the R1 million until I've applied for finance or go to the bank, get a loan, right? As an example. Now, yes, now there's still an obligation on me to approach the bank. But there's no obligation on you to give me the property. There's no obligation on me to give you the money. I do have to go to the bank though. But if the bank says no, then we're out. The contract falls away. Unenforceable. We get to go our different ways, and I get to go buy another property. You get to go sell it somewhere else. So all the suspensive condition does is it gives you an easy exit so that you don't bind yourself. And that's, for example, a mistake some people make when it comes to sheriff's auctions. They don't realize, because they assume all property transactions have suspensive conditions that you can go to the bank and get a loan. Sheriff's auctions don't. And they don't realize this because it might not be something they look for. When you start getting into more advanced property transactions or businesses, you start adding things like due diligence in. Because now if you're buying a building, you want to see the rental roll. You want to understand who your tenant is. How many tenants do you have? How many have signed lease agreements? How long are the lease agreements for? Have they been paying? Are there any defaulters or problem tenants? Is there anything happening in that building that once you take over, all of a sudden this house of cards comes crumbling down? So now, for example, as you start getting more advanced, you start trying to make provision for an investigation into the transaction. Same with businesses. If you buy, and even a property business, if you have a property business, for example, that has a contract with a university, for instance, or has any contract. Let's say you supply cars and you've got a contract where you supply cars to one specific person and it's a recurring income. When you buy this business without doing a legal due diligence, what's the point of buying a contract that might not be renewed in 1 month's time? Because then you're going to lose that value. If the university is on the verge of cancelling or they don't have to renew for the next year, what are you buying? Why are you paying for a contract? Because everything you're buying in this deal includes the cost, the value of that contract, because that contract is going to bring income. But now you're paying value, but is that contract actually, do you have it tied down? Rental agents, big conversation I have with them, they run these rental businesses and they look at their book, their assets, which is the clients and the properties that they manage, and they value it based on that. But then if you look at their mandates with landlords,
mandates have expired.
Or there's no provision for a cession or a sale. So they can't hand over these mandates to someone that buys their business because these mandates are with them and them only. So now they have to
concede to the next business owner.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what do? There's no value in that because now you don't know if this landlord's going to say yes or no. So you can't sell that book unless now you've secured everyone under a new mandate so that you're able to sell. So things like that, very important when you're selling businesses or doing any sort of commercial transactions.
So how then would be the best way to assess any potential risks associated with those kind of deals?
Yeah, there's always a legal and a financial due diligence.
Sure.
Right? Those are the most important. Obviously, as you get more advanced, you might want to look at operational due diligence as well. So there's teams of people that I work with that look at the operations and make sure they're streamlined and that sort of thing. Right employee for the right job. But from a legal and financial side, I work with auditors and chartered accountants. I do the tax side of it with them as well. You have to tick every box. So if you're buying shares, you need to look into this company. You need to assess this company. You need to get tax clearance certificates, as an example. If you're buying a property and it's got a massive, it's a building, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you're going to need to do your due diligence when it comes to conditions. So operationally, is the building sound? Mm-hmm. Legally, are the right building plans in place? Is the right zoning in place for this building? Legally speaking, are the contracts in place? Your supplier contracts, the university, for example, or all these tenants. Are these the right tenants as well? So it's not simply just a matter of there's a contract, but are they the right tenants? Are they the tenants that are going to stay there for long? Are they paying the right amount of money? All of those things are very important. That's normally what I refer to as red flags or indicators. So in all contracts that I draft, there's always red flags. So things that the owner needs to be wary of, and that as he runs the business, they come up and they give him this awareness that something might be wrong.
So in terms of then your approach when it comes to litigation, how do you determine the best course of action for clients? I mean, I know I've come to you with a matter and I said, please solve this for me, family member.
Yeah.
So how do you determine what the best course of action is? Because when we spoke on the phone, it sounded to me you already had a solution.
Yeah, sure.
So how do you determine what the best course of action is for each client?
Sure. So litigation, for starters, is never the first or best course of action. And I think that's the most important thing to remember.
So it's like avoid the war.
Yeah.
Sun Tzu.
Yeah, no, exactly. Or have the fight, but have the smart fight.
Okay.
Right, beforehand. Honestly, if the first advice anyone gets is litigate, it's already a problem because a very few cases lend themselves only to litigation as being the only solution. I'm not saying all, but like there are cases where you look at this and you're like,
is that what they mean by settle out of court?
Yes. But it's also with the art of negotiation, there's always approaches that a person can take. And again, it's about managing your environment. Right? And it depends on the type of case. So some cases, again, if they're highly emotive, it's about actually being able to have the conversation with the client to try to bring the emotion down. It's also about trying to find out how you're going to do that to the other side as well. Because if both parties are emotive, you need to try calm the situation down because you're not going to get any resolve. Right? And sometimes the solution is to start litigation because once it gets real, then emotions go down. So again, litigation has a purpose, but it's not just about, for example, getting a court order at the end. Mm-hmm. You try the different avenues to see what you can do. And believe it or not, 80% of the time, you can get the solution that the client wants, the full solution without compromise, just by communicating it properly because there's misunderstandings. So as an example, imagine that you want 5 things. Right? But two of them really aren't that important. But you tell this guy, I want 5 things. Yeah. Now, this guy on these 2 things is where he gets emotive. He's angry now because he doesn't want to give you these 2. No one has communicated that your priority of those 2 things are irrelevant. Or like you've just said them and you would have thought that somebody would have communicated back. But you said it, he says no. And that's where the conversation ends. And now you phone your attorney and go, what do I do? Now let's sue. Sometimes it is about having the conversation going, oh, but this isn't important. And he goes, oh, well, if that's not important, I'm okay with the other three. That's perfect.
Right.
And everyone actually manages to walk away. So that communication, mediation, like it's key.
So does that mean it's best to stay out of court as much as you can in that case?
Court's expensive. There's certain matters where you can't.
And perhaps maybe tell the people that are watching what litigation is. I mean, you and I might be speaking because we understand what exactly we're talking about. Yeah. But there are some people watching thinking, what exactly is litigation?
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
Look, so the court process in general, there's different ways that we approach court as attorneys, but we don't necessarily need to go into the detail of that. But ultimately, litigation normally starts with a set of papers that are drafted. These set of papers set out your client's case. Right. So whether it's a plaintiff or an applicant, doesn't matter. You set out your client's case in these papers and you take it to the court. The court gives it a number and you take it to the person that you're suing potentially and you give it to them. Right. The sheriff does that. Summons or application. Sure. Right. Now, the sheriff does that. And if I'm suing you, you get this from the sheriff and you read it and it says there. It's a notice and it says that you've got X amount of days to do this and X amount of days to do this. Now it's your turn to reply to this, right? One way or another, you have to answer to it. And then usually under, whether it's a summons, whether it's an application, I've also then got the right to reply to that. And by that point, you start getting ready for court. If it's an application, works very differently. An application, basically, everything gets done on papers. So when you get to the court, you don't call witnesses, you don't cross-examine, you don't do the few good men thing. It's just about getting up. It's actually quite boring for anyone watching. I've had clients going, no, but I want to go to court and see you win. And they sit there and they realize it's not that exciting. So like application.
There's no drama like there is on
drama.
TV.
You get up, you get up, you get up. The judge sometimes makes people sit down when they get up too much, and that's it. And the case is heard. And a lot of the times it's postponed or whatever the case is.
Lots of postponements, eh?
Yeah, but there's a reason for that, and I'm sure we're going to get to that when we speak about evictions as the one type of litigation. Summons ends in trial, so that's what people perceive as the more exciting version of court. So that's where you put people up in a witness box and you ask them questions, and then the other guy cross-examines them, and people cry, and that sort of thing. But so that's litigation. So it's one or the other. Either way, you go in front of a judge or a magistrate and they grant some form of order, and that order gets executed afterwards. So that's the meaning of litigation.
Okay. And then can you share like a successful litigation strategy that you've employed in the past?
So aside from that example that I already gave you, with evictions specifically, and now I'm mentioning evictions because this obviously we're speaking about property.
Correct.
And if we consider litigation and we consider one of the most common forms in the property space, it would have to be evictions, right? All the other ones are fairly unique.
Or someone not fulfilling their responsibilities in an agreement of sale.
So that is less common, but yes. So that is actually quite an easy one, fortunately. So every one that we've done where we've compelled someone to sell a property, it's been relatively easy.
Sure.
As long as all the suspensive conditions.
Because I've seen people sign deals and then they're like, "Nah, I'm not selling anymore." I'm like, "No, you signed the contract.
It's actually,
what do you mean you're not selling anymore?"
It's actually one of the most pleasant forms of litigation for me, because even the cost I get to collect later from the seller. Because remember, we're paying the purchase price. Well, I'm assuming now my client's the purchaser. We're paying the purchase price. We issue a guarantee. We're happy to pay. Now he says, no, he doesn't want to sell. You go to court, I barely think twice about it. You go to court, application to compel.
So that one is straight litigation. You don't even waste your time. You go.
Because obviously I try to persuade him. But the reality is the seller has more to lose than the purchaser, because we have the money. So at the end of the day, whatever cost order we get, because the chances of winning, I wouldn't go to court if I think we're going to lose. So the chances of winning are high, and whatever I spend, I get to collect from you. So the more you fight, the more you're going to land up paying out of the purchase price. So it's one of those matters where the seller lands up digging their own grave as a figure of speech, because you've got all the recourse and the collectability of those costs are just, they're there because you've got the purchase price. You get that court order, conveyancer holds it, and the court order specifically says deducted from the purchase price. And you hand it over to the conveyancer and you force the transaction. And the court orders at the end is basically the sheriff signing the documents on behalf of the seller. So you don't even need him to sign things anymore. The sheriff signs it.
That's interesting. I mean, can that be, when you look at law of contracts, can that be applied then to every other contract to say the one that actually is in the right on that contract has a higher chance of obviously being heard in court, and also then claiming for damages from the other party to say, we had an agreement, you relegated on that agreement, therefore you've cost me X amount of money through litigation, I'm going to claim back that cost from you.
Absolutely.
Right.
The only thing is, unfortunately, is there money? So where's the money?
Show me the money.
Yeah. So if you're the purchaser and you're getting an asset and you've got the money and your costs are less than the money you're paying, then you're good.
Okay. So it can be claimed against the guarantees.
So once the guarantees are paid out, the conveyancer releases the money, or you claim it against the guarantees, whichever way you want to draft it. But it's because you've got the leverage.
At that moment, whereas with any other contract, you wouldn't have the leverage. Can you go deeper in terms of that explanation, in terms of the difference between
So it depends. So obviously it depends on the size of the asset, right? So that's the first and foremost. So size of asset versus cost of litigation. So a smaller transaction where you're buying something for 10,000 Rand, right? Now you're going to litigate to force the guy to give you that asset for 10,000. And now you get a cost order, so you get to keep the 10, but your legal costs were 30, right? Correct. So obviously, and now you need to try run and collect it from him. It's like, okay, but there's a shortfall of 20, I need it from you. And this is exactly where, are you going to be able to collect it? Does he have enough assets that you can actually sell to be able to collect it?
More like attaching assets now.
Whereas if your asset is 50,000, right? It's a bit easier. Now, also remember, property is fixed and the deeds office transfers it. If you're buying movables, like a car, right? Now, you get a court order, where's the car? Now you need to go run around trying to find the car, right? So again, the carries a risk. A property is not going anywhere, right? Whereas a car does. A property you can even watch and make sure that nothing's happening to it. You can keep an eye on it. A car can disappear and you take it across the border, it's like chances are you're not going to get it back. So we've had plenty of litigation where some of our commercial clients are trying to recover vehicles. It's extremely difficult. If they take it across the border, now you have to hire private investigators to go run across the border and send reports and try find the cars. It's excruciatingly difficult. So property litigation, especially when it comes to compelling a sale, is safe. Some corporate transactions, especially if both parties in the transaction have some stability, yes, it's safe. But it really depends on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't understand that obviously contracts will span across a whole lot of sections within the law. I mean, family law, you've got settlement agreements, you've got maintenance agreements, you've got parental plans.
Absolutely.
All of those things are agreements. And people don't understand. You can't just wake up and relegate and say, I've signed it, sue me.
No, absolutely. And I mean, we have this problem. I definitely wouldn't say it's a South African thing. I think it is all over the world. But people don't understand the binding nature. And there's often confusion between fairness and obligation. A person enters into, I still remember people entered into lease agreements. And the lease agreement says it's 12 months. And you get, and this was before the CPA saying that you can give like early termination notice, right?
Yes.
So way before this, and you get a letter going, I'm moving out at the end of the month. And you ask, no, but you know you can't do that. Of course I can. I'm giving my notice. You know, I heard on TV there's notice. But your contract's for 12 months. You can't just give notice. Your contract's not month to month.
Yeah.
You're bound. You understand that there's an integrity involved.
Can they argue and say that contract is not a court order?
No. Well, look, they can't argue because it is still an agreement between two parties. They can argue and say, well, make me. But then you've got the option to go to court and sue them for the damages, whatever that might
Or
have
that's
been.
when you're getting the order now.
Yeah. And then come after them. But again, is it worth doing? Now with the Consumer Protection Act and that early termination notice, it's slightly different. And also remember, landlords hold on to deposits. So the typical example now is the contract can be 12 months. Tenant can cancel it at any time he wants, but provision is made for a cancellation penalty. And that normally gets taken out of the deposit. So the landlord with rentals does normally have some kind of safety net.
So clients always have expectations, I'm guessing, in these kind of situations. So how do you manage those expectations? Where somebody's saying, we're going to court, Bruno, I heard you win. I expect nothing else but a win. I mean, obviously it's an expectation. How do you manage those?
Sure. I think with experience and seniority, it's become a little bit easier to do this. I see with the youngsters, they struggle because they're trying to be everything for the client, even though they're not. With experience, I am able to actually sit the client down and go, I've been doing this for a long time. So yes, absolutely.
Seniority.
Success in litigation. But I can tell you right now that if I have an understanding of what your expectation is, you're not going to walk out of this happy. Right? You're going to spend a lot of money and you're not going to get the outcome that you really want. You might get a outcome or there's a huge risk that you're not going to get this outcome. So you're going to stop me midway and you're going to be disappointed. And then you're going to be upset with me that I didn't get this outcome that you wanted. So I'm telling you right now that this is how we should approach it. At the very least, try this first. Let's do this. Let's maneuver around this. Then we go to court and set these expectations. Same thing with costs. I would rather, honestly, because I know the value that I add, I would rather a client complain about cost rather than complain that I didn't do my job properly. Because that also makes it very difficult. I see it with youngsters and young practitioners out there, again, trying to be everything for the client, and they land up so deep in a matter that they basically start losing money. I've seen law firms close down because they keep getting too deep into these matters. Then they're running around, they're not charging the clients anymore. They're in trouble because they're trying to keep these clients happy because they didn't manage the expectation at the beginning. And there's this...
I mean, it's understandable. We all assume if I go to court, I'm going to win. I mean, nobody goes to court to lose, is it?
No, fair enough, yeah. But the funny thing with law is it is gray. Like there is never 100% chance of anything. And that's certain things you have higher prospects. So take an eviction, for example. An eviction matter, the way that our law is designed, there shouldn't be any reason whatsoever that you won't get an eviction order if you own the property. Right?
Correct.
So as a rule of thumb. But there are many, many instances where, for example, if it results in homelessness, there's going to be a delay in the process. So the court might not grant the order as soon as you want it to be granted. And that's again where you need a proper attorney that understands this and knows how to foresee that this issue might arise, can actually warn you about it and say, oh, listen, this case might be a bit of a problem. Can we do this? We've had cases, and it's an exception rather than the rule. So this isn't advice to people to say you have to do this. Far from it. Like 99% of our cases, very nice, the eviction orders get granted. But we've had cases where strategically we've had to even position someone and move them into alternative accommodation. We want this. We need this. This is way beyond your means. This will result in homelessness, maybe because the person's elderly. This is one place we can move you. We don't mind moving you there. And these were clients that had bigger properties and this was causing a problem. So again, that's an exception. I'm not saying landowners need to give alternative accommodation. In fact, they don't. But it is knowing what to do, when to do it. Yeah.
So what trends do you see shaping the property industry in the next few years?
I had conversations with some of the larger property holding companies. I'm seeing quite a few trends arising. So, for starters, repurposing. There's a lot of commercial spaces that are being repurposed. And this comes with gentrification, for example, or comes with certain commercial hubs not being as commercial as they once were. A few of the guys in the commercial space are saying that they're getting more businesses picking up for them, but I'm also finding the shared office space being a very big thing now. So I don't know if people are going to get offices only for themselves or if they're going to start designing themselves around these shared office spaces, especially because of those grades that are coming out now. You can get space in these office buildings that have awesome amenities, that have restaurants and massage parlors and a whole range of things that you sometimes can't get just by buying in an office park. So I think now there's a lot more options because people are being innovative, especially after COVID.
Sure.
And then I see this also happening in the property space. So there's still a massive demand for housing, massive shortage. And it's not just lower LSM where we're worried, obviously with homelessness or poverty, this is all across the board. Like good accommodation for people that don't necessarily want to buy. So I'm seeing multifamily happening all over the place. They're trying to create environments where people don't need to buy, where people don't need to worry about safety and security. Everything's in one place. And this is anything from low, middle, and high. The amenities are just different naturally, but I'm seeing this multifamily space growing immensely.
Nice. Yeah. And then what do you think would be the regulatory changes that might affect or impact these kind of trends or these kind of deals that people would be getting into?
I actually had this conversation at Reside Summit. It's similar to this because multifamily it's not a concept that we as South Africans totally understand. So we can't define it in our law. We can't take multifamily and say, it's defined in this piece of legislation and this is how multifamily living works. It's a broader concept of, being or togetherness, right? And then the lawyers come in and go, okay, sure, but what does this mean? What do we do?
But shouldn't it be the definition of Ubuntu?
Yeah, no, exactly. No, precisely. But the problem is, again, Ubuntu sets the principle or the spirit of how we should treat each other. But the problem is my perception on being treated well is different to your perception of being treated well. Right. And we look at this all the time through cultural differences or gender differences or religious differences where people have their view, they have their view. And unless you're so open-minded to go, he said that, but it wasn't out of, malice, right? People obviously get, maybe get offended at something somebody says, or I don't get up when you walk to me, or whatever the case is, I shake your hand, you don't want me to shake your hand.
Sitting down.
Yeah, and where I do that all the time, for example, maybe this person sees it as a sign of disrespect. Calling someone by their first name, not their surname. Like there's many, many examples of that. So again, with the spirit's there. Be understanding. But that's something deep down inside. Like we all need to go for therapy and open up our minds and start being good to each other. The law takes this, it creates a safety net for that, going, okay, guys, whether you're going to be a good person or not, we're going to create the system that's going to at least govern how we're going to deal with this. Multifamily, as an example, doesn't exist. So we have body corporates. That's multifamily because it's multiple families living in a building.
Sectional title.
Homeowner associations, that's multifamily, but they are treated very differently. Homeowner associations aren't as strict as body corporates when it comes to, the financial management and stuff. But now what about, for example, multi-tenanted buildings, multi-tenanted houses? So your student accommodation with shared amenities. What does that fall under? Because that has nothing to do with body corporate rules because that's ownership. So now we're dealing with tenant rules, right? But tenants having to now deal with other tenants and a landlord. So now it's a conversation over how are they going to get along. So we've got the Rental Housing Act here. We've got the Sectional Title Management Act here. We've got the Ombud that deals with this, but not necessarily with this. We've got the Rental Housing Tribunal, and there's this mix. So
Do the rules of the landlord come into play as well?
Yeah.
In that?
So the the Rental Housing Act does provide for that. Yeah. There are rules. They should be included in the lease agreement. I don't think landlords give as much attention because, again, and I feel bad for them. Imagine now the landlord having to create this governing document, trying to make contingencies for everything that could go wrong between two human beings that he's renting property to.
Sometimes even 10 families.
Yeah.
10 fathers.
So I think that also needs to be now not governed, but maybe there should be more templates out there that assist people that have multi-tenanted properties.
Right. Perhaps you can come up with that.
Yeah. Maybe.
So what advice would you have for individuals that are looking to invest in property? Be it for the first time, be it one guy is waking up wanting to buy a building, or a guy wanting to do buy to let, or perhaps what you just explained, multi-family units.
Economically, the housing market is quite strong. If you consider business and economics in general, you're looking for a demand, right? You're going to create a supply in order to cover the demand. If there's no demand, what's the point of having a supply? There is a housing shortage. And it's not going to get sorted out very soon. And there's a lot of urbanization, meaning that the shortage is getting bigger and bigger. So yes, you know what? At some point, maybe in some utopia, we're going to hit that, perfect barrier where there's enough houses for enough people. But even then, people are going to want to upgrade and move to somewhere else and move to different areas. So housing is always going to be a thing. So real estate been strong for many, many years. I don't see it going anywhere. We don't have a lot of capital growth at the moment in South Africa, but that doesn't necessarily stay constant, right? It depends on the market. Depends, again, if there's a demand, there's going to be capital growth. So anyone wanting to invest in property, I personally do think it's a good idea, but run the numbers, understand, get educated on what property investment actually entails. You want to be able to know that you're not going to be short at the end of the month. Worst thing I saw as an example is lack of preparation in COVID, when the interest rates went to a complete low. And everyone thought it was a fantastic idea to buy cash flow even properties because, I can get a cheap bond. I'll cover the bond. It's perfect. I'm going to cover it without without thinking that 2-3 years time, interest rates are going to shoot back up and you didn't stress test it against a higher bond. So now what's happening? No sales and execution, COVID, no sales and execution. After COVID, slowly, sales and execution started getting up. We started getting phone calls from clients back in the game going, yeah, we're just waiting. We're just waiting for the spike.
Sure.
So that's the danger. Run your numbers. Don't now put yourself in a position where you can't afford to pay.
Awesome. So in terms of your ongoing education and professional development in your practice, how often do you do that, and what exactly do you do? How do you prioritize it?
Look, it's consistent. In a environment where learning is constant, you have to keep learning. It is number one about being the example. So learn. Just keep learning, always have those debates, have meetings in the morning, discuss files, and ask questions. I sometimes ask my junior attorneys when they've learned something, well, explain it to me. Maybe I don't know because you've just discovered something new, explain. So it is very important to, number one, spark that interest.
Sure.
Not let everyone sit by themselves, that skills transfer. So again, one of those COVID things where people started working from home doesn't work. You want to be able to have that conversation, that it's called over-the-shoulder learning. If I'm in an office space and you're doing this, and I walk past you enough times and I hear you speak about this over and over and over, you're going to become an expert. So if I sat here and I had the same conversations with clients and you were overhearing this conversation, you could do a consultation of that specific thing that I'm speaking about. Anyone can learn. I think it is just creating an environment where learning is good.
Okay. So you know your story. So have you had any notable mentorship experiences or people that have poured into you in terms of mentorship over the course of your career?
So that saying about never meet your hero, it's actually quite funny. When I thought about this at a stage, everyone's looking for a mentor. Everyone. And you want to be this kid who has this great person that does no wrong, or does one wrong, but it's a cool wrong. It's one of those TV wrongs where everyone laughs about it in the back. And you know what? Some people are lucky enough to have that, but more often than not, your mentors or that one person you look up to has a lot more flaws than you care to notice. And it's very dangerous to commit to this being a mentor and encapsulating this person's personality without any question. For me, honestly, I've never been able to have one mentor as much as I wanted it, right? But when I look back, it's not a bad thing. So little mentorships is what I understood when I looked at my dad and the way that he worked and the way that he provided his commitment, the way that I looked at my mom and her commitment. With my first practice, the two people that taught me the most were two ladies, the conveyancing and one litigation attorney. And I don't think anyone could have taught me how to litigate like she did, because her head was in the right space. That was what she did. And her approach, and yes, sometimes we had our fallouts, but everything that I learned was so important. And every day when I get mentored by my business partners who sometimes sit me down and come up with an idea that I didn't think about. Even your employees and some of the things that they do that surprise you. For me, learning from that and appreciating that, it's little bits of mentorship from everyone. If you appreciate certain things, you don't have to always take the bad, but appreciate the good.
So I know you've got a strong professional network. How have you been able to build and maintain a professional network? I know you love sitting down and having conversations. Even when we met, you'd say, "Witness, we can't talk over the phone. Let's have coffee or something." So how have you been able to build and maintain those relationships?
Coffee and wine.
Coffee and wine.
It's like it works beautifully. Morning meetings and afternoon meetings, coffee and wine. Never do midday meetings.
But not everybody will say yes to a meeting. How do you get people to actually say, "Yes, Bruno, I'll meet you. I'll give you my time"?
No, absolutely. Look, I suppose the thing is, it never hurts to try. Approach someone, and as you approach someone and they've got a friend and it's someone that you want to meet, you can always reach out to them. You have to know who you want to meet and who you want to approach. The more conversations, more conferences I attend where I'm a speaker, it also creates awareness. So awareness isn't just about, my brand and being able to get leads. The reality is, the more you learn, the more you're able to speak about what you've learned with some level of authority, the more people listen. And the more people also want to have conversations with you. So it's one of those things, like, be interesting and people are going to want to explore that interest. And that's the best way I can describe it. Like, be good to yourself, do your job properly. And it's very easy to start having conversations with people in your industry because they're going to see the value that you add. And then don't be scared to ask, because if you bump into someone, shake their hand, get their phone number, send them a message later, because you'd be surprised. The people, it's like, "Oh, do you want to grab a coffee?" Sure. Oh, well, that's great. Let's grab a coffee. It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst that can happen is the person goes, "No, I'm very busy," and they ghost you, and you're like, "That's fine."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you had the opportunity to speak to the young Bruno through that camera, you look him in the eyes and speak to him. Perhaps maybe the young Bruno is black, or is colored, or is white, or is Portuguese, or is Angolan, or you're looking him in the eye and saying, "Young Bruno, let me speak to you because I have seniority now and I've got experience." What would you say to him?
Yeah, that's actually a good one. It's like a curveball there. I can honestly say that I don't have regrets. Yes, I've done things wrong. Small things that, maybe I could have done differently, but I don't have regrets. What I would really like small Bruno, anyone out there, to learn is, I think we underplay collaboration. I think that in business, as a lawyer, anyone getting into any space, there is a level of selfishness or pride that's associated with it. I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of young people nowadays that they haven't grown up in the same way that the older generation has. So it is a brand new generation. The work environment is very different. Even the setup, the way that people work from home, it's become tough for the younger generation because getting that direct mentorship, that over-the-shoulder learning, isn't as easy as it used to be. So the best advice I can give to any young person out there is start collaborating now. Put your pride aside, put your ego aside. If you're young, this is the time to learn because this is the time that you can make mistakes. And those people around you are willing to protect you because they're the ones teaching you. Once you hit a certain age and you start making mistakes, you're on your own.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any last words that you want to say concerning everything that we've discussed? If you were to summarize the entire conversation, what would you say?
Look, I mean, aside from thanking you for having me here, and I always find things like this so impactful, and I really hope that people are watching because there's a lot of youngsters out there, and then it's you and me. And not that you're old, like I'm old, you're young, but younger people, like guys out there getting
way younger than me, right?
Guys getting into any space, whether it's property space, whether it's business space, employment space, and the thing is, we speak at a certain level, and I always worry that youngsters look up and they don't quite understand it, or they think it's, it's tomorrow's problem, or it's overwhelming. I don't know what that means right now. Like youngsters getting into property, there's so much you can do out there. But again, with everything that I said, it comes down to preparation, understanding what you're doing, like having that plan of action, having that motivation to move forward, but being able to plan it. And understand, not being caught unawares. As an example, a lot of youngsters go from career to career not knowing what they want to do. And I think it is important for these conversations to actually be impactful on them, because the more we discuss it, the more they realize what it's about. It's not TV lawyers, it's not flashy cars, it's not just wearing suits. Like, wear suits if you enjoy wearing suits, but the reality is it's hard work. It's hard work for you and all the businesses you do. It's hard work for me. But this is how I came to be here. So if this is a path that you want to follow, great. If not, then at least you've learned something new. Maybe then I am not your role model, but that's okay too. But I think it has to be impactful. So like what you're doing here it changes lives.
And thank you so much. I know to have you for an hour plus would cost a lot of money because it's more like a consultation. and you took your time. You could have been spending it with clients working on a deal. And you said, let me take some time to go impact some young people or older people that are watching and they've got properties and they don't know what to do in terms of their businesses and their careers and their portfolios. Sure. So I, for one, do appreciate that and I appreciate the connection.
Sure.
And I appreciate you so much. May the business keep growing. May you keep doing more deals. And I told you guys that are watching that you need to take out a pen and paper and write down some of these things that we're discussing. But good for you, because this episode you can watch it as many times as you can. You can extrapolate as much information from it as you can. How do people find you?
Easiest way. So my social media profile is quite active. So LinkedIn, Facebook, very, very active. Otherwise on my website. So Brunos Simao Law. So the spelling is a bit of a issue. But if you go on my website, you'll find everything. And there's stuff there. There's videos there as well. Links to YouTube playlists on everything property, everything business, everything tax.
Awesome stuff. All right, guys, we're broadcasting from our QGI Consulting and Publishing offices in Johannesburg, South Africa. From me and my team, it's more than just money. We'll see you in the next episode. Ciao, ciao.